Welcome to the Organizational Collective broadcast. Today, starring Christine and Terry.
Yeah, I don't have our fancy entrance like we do because Doug is not able to be here today. But I do have, in place of the fancy intro, my good friend and partner, Christine McGinley. And what are we talking about today?
We're going to talk about cultural drift and some solutions people have and some that are better than others. I think that's what it is. Why cultural drift, Terry? Where did we come up with that concept?
Well, we came up with the concept when we were talking to one of our friends about one of the bigger problems that we see in businesses. And it's not that people do have cash flow issues and they do have leadership issues, but a lot of times it's because they forget about something that is really important to pay attention to, and that's how we want to show up and how we want to uh, interact with people on a daily basis in our business.
Yeah, I think often when we describe what we do, we forget the word culture. We don't use that word culture consultants. And then after we describe what we do, people are like, oh, you're culture consultants. And we're like, yeah, it is, but it's a lot more than like cultural in the world. It's like, how does your company feel when somebody walks in, whether it's a new person, a vendor, or a client? Can they immediately feel what's going on and what's most important to you as a business? Is it living? Do you feel it? Like when you walk into, we'll just use Starbucks for example.
You know,
Why not? Just
and it,
many
actually,
years
that's
of experience and still patrons there, and
well,
we
and the thing is it's such a good example right now because they're going through so many shifts.
right, which we'll circle back to as one of those times that cultural drift does happen. Um, but it's the culture when you walk in the store. Sure, it's the same, guiding principles, mission, vision, and competencies across the corporation, but each store has its own feel. Each shift may have its own feel. And so that's what we're talking about when we describe the word cultural.
Absolutely, absolutely. And so again, why is it important?
To uphold it consistently. Is that the question?
Yeah, why is what does it matter? Aren't we just about making money? And as long as we're doing that, we're good.
I think for some individuals, that's what they think the answer is. I think that, I mean, where are the money leaks? Where are the money gaps? I often see it in the turnover or great people leaving or investing in the wrong people, just hiring to fill a spot because their availability fits the availability you're looking for, or the job description they did in their other job that they let them go because of job cuts. Um, that's one piece of it. Do they have those qualifications? But how do they enhance your culture, or do you even know what your culture is?
That's a real good question about really have you ever taken the time in your business to really think about what you're really doing your business for, which is one of the first questions that we help people kind of understand. And then the next is how on a daily basis you're going to show up and behave in your business. And those are the two things. And I don't think people really think about it. Well, I'm gonna go to work and I'm gonna either serve the people or do the job or whatever I'm gonna do, and then I'll get paid and then I'll go home and live my life. But they don't think about what all that goes into it, or if they do, they don't talk about it. And so what
Right.
happens
It,
when
it gets it gets put in the orientation book and then left aside until they realize that they've drifted.
yeah, until they're derailing, or they're so off track from what they were wanting, and then it's like, how did we get here? How did we end up with this situation? And it's funny because a lot of businesses start focusing on marketing, or they start focusing on trying to innovate when they're having problems, instead of going, wait a minute, what's going on with how we are as a team, how we are as a group of people trying to work towards some kind of objective. They don't look at that too much.
Yeah, the organization as a whole, not just the team around you. But I mean, as we always focus on, it starts with the leader in leadership of how am I showing up every day? How am I reminding my team of what the vision is, what our mission is, and having the conversations around using the cultural terms, no matter what they are, or the guiding principles. I think that's a really important, is not only do you as the owner or the manager or, director, vice president, whatever title it is that you hold, how are you sharing that and empowering your team to also be living those values? It also makes conversations just easier because you have terms that are common across the board.
Absolutely. So going back to Starbucks, when you first started there, what was the culture like, and how did you know that they had a really strong culture?
um, Sheesh, that's a loaded, long time ago question, Terry.
Well, yeah,
But I think the company itself started in the late 70s. So it had some time to, or it was more established in the 70s. I think it started in 1971. Now I'm going back to my own onboarding or onboarding team members. But it was really that whole idea of, we were trained, it was the third place. You had work, you had home, and then you had Starbucks, where our friends last night described it as it's still their cheers. That's where they go in, whether they meet people, they have relationships, and that's just kind of their routine and happiness. And so that's the culture that we were building it around. And as we all know, it started to expand rapidly in the early 2000s. And that's when I was working there. And, merging brands, merging concepts, Frappuccinos, coffee, breakfast artist sandwiches started while I was managing. And it just kept like evolving into a bigger beast and a bigger beast. And it kind of drifted away from what the core was inspiring people one cup at a time. That simple was that. And then while keeping the competencies kind of idea, the core competencies, the farmers, and it was, you were a partner, you were highly involved, your opinion mattered. And then it just came more into, how can we produce faster service? Because that's what the consumer wants. They want drive-throughs, they want apps, they want triple star days. They want to be incentivized, and there's other coffee brands. And how do we keep up? How do we distinguish ourselves? And they decided that, and we still purchase Starbucks. I still have stock. So I still support Starbucks, but you can see the mission change. And each time, I know this is a piece Terry wants me to highlight, when Howard Schultz, the CEO, the leader, the inspirer, the man that built the company to give benefits because his family didn't have benefits growing up, that and education, and always loading things on when Howard Schultz is in charge, because he knows that if the team is loyal to the brand, they are loyal to the customers, and they want more people to be loyal. And each time there is a shift in leadership, there seems to be a shift in the values and the culture, and it can be seen from both sides of the counter.
Absolutely. That's a very good example. And they're going through another shift right now, and I think a lot of people probably know about it because it's all over the news that they let go of their CEO they just hired, and they put a new one in there, and we'll see what happens. I have a different experience with a different establishment that I didn't tell Christine that I was going to talk about, but it just brought this idea up to me that Christine was working at Starbucks, very, very solid cultural identity. And at that time that she was doing that, I was in school, and I was working in a prison system as a correctional psychologist, finishing my degree. And I was hired in as a result of cultural problems. And the funny thing is about the prison system is It's not actually thought of as, hey, let's get together and have a meeting, a vision of where we want to go and how we want to do what we do. It's much more reactionary. And I was actually hired in as a result of a lawsuit because someone committed suicide. And so, funny enough,
One of the
one of the
employees or
inmates, yeah, one of the
inmates?
inmates committed suicide. And thank you for clarifying that. But the idea is that prisons are often only making changes when there's a lawsuit that tells them they have to do something different. And so one of the big ideas is in this idea of like, what is our culture and what are we attempting to do? Why do we exist? Prison is a really good thing to think about because it's a business in itself. It's supposed to be the business of rehabilitation, but it's the business of putting people where we're scared of them and we don't want to deal with them anymore. And there's this.
Is your business like that?
Is your business like that? And it's unfortunate because the idea is we really do want to rehabilitate people. And I know for me, I wanted to go in there and I was hoping to actually be a change agent, and I was. But the prison worked against that because there's the politics that goes on, and there's the money that they're trying to spend wisely, but at the same time, they're everybody that's working there on the police side of things is kind of mad at the inmates because they did what they did and they're not understanding. And there's a whole lot of coercion, and there's a whole lot of pressure, and there's a whole lot of infighting just built into the idea of a prison, right? Because you're keeping people in some place that they don't want to be, and they can't get out of. And so it's like societal agreement of keeping hostages, right? Because they did wrong. Now they're going to be hostage for a certain amount of time until they rehabilitate, but they don't rehabilitate by meeting goals. They rehabilitate by how much time they've been given as punishment. And so it's a really weird thing that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. But as a result, instead of creating a culture of change and a culture of growth and a culture of helping people make better decisions, they create a culture of oppression and a culture of pressure and a culture of badness that you have to do your time to get better. And they're very, very caustic environment. I hear people talk about their businesses as toxic environments all of the time. I don't know if you read that much in Forbes or whatever, but how do you know when you have a toxic situation? Well, prison's pretty toxic. I'm just going to say. So how do you create a culture inside of that starts to actually develop some kind of movement forward? And that's where I came from. And I actually created a program that was adopted for a little while before they decided to close the prison because they ran out of money. So good program, working well. Let's close it and move all the people out to different prisons. My point is that was a very caustic situation, and it was very, very difficult to create a culture of change in that oppressive situation. And so as I think about Starbucks and how uplifting it was and is, and how people are really trying to grow and move somewhere, you have a very, very different culture where we're trying to keep people in a place and keep people from being out in society and hurting anybody, but they do it and it doesn't really work culturally. And they don't really think about it. And as a result, there's very little change that happens for people that get out after they've been processed out or done their time or whatever. And I just think about that, and I think about those two different ideas whenever I go into a business. And my thought is, okay, how derailed are they? How much are they like the prison, and how much are they like Starbucks? because I have the experience of both of those fairly well. And it's just interesting because a lot of times I think that we end up more like the prison system with dictates and mandates, and this is the way it's got to be done, rather than how do we want to be. What do you think?
I I think you're talking a little on the whole of an
Absolutely.
organization, but I
Absolutely.
also know, because I am your partner, I know a little bit of when you're talking about the politics and silos. I like that piece because you're talking about the employees that work there and them wanting to move forward. And I know you and Doug are going to be talking about that a little bit more, about the individual is looking at their agenda and their promotion and their status and their acknowledgments and their awards. And we all know people that are involved in that. Those typically aren't our clients, unless they're looking to have a bigger impact, like you did with your curriculum, your program that you introduced, moving the inmates from being siloed in their 24 and 1 or 23 and 1,
23 and 1.
what 1 hour out in a cage and then the rest you're in your cell, but which is very powerful. And you were looking at the impact as a whole. And I think that's one of the biggest things that the organizational health collective looks at as well, is how do we get everybody to have that amazing experience. And it starts by infusing that culture in, and always keeping it top of mind, having it cascading and living in all of your systems. And so it creates that common knowledge of it. And comparing Starbucks and a prison, it is a jump, and that's very Terry Wager for you.
But and the reality is they both have a culture. One is a culture of fear, one is a culture of connection.
I
And
think I think any manager could create a culture of fear.
oh, absolutely. And so that's why I'm like, okay, how is this like the prison? How is this like the Starbucks? And it is a jump, and I do love the jumps, but how do we get this culture of fear to be a culture of connection? What
I
is the
love
steps
that
that needs
thought.
to
Yeah.
happen? What are the steps that need to happen? And where else are we like the prison? And where else are we stopping the connection, or having the belief that we need to make these people do something rather than invite them to take action?
I think that's a great thing. Like, it comes back to, and we talk about it all the time, what's fear? Where does fear come from? And I think fear comes from not having clarity so much of what that expectation is, or where you're going, or not aligned, or um, if it's a dictatorship like you were speaking of in the prison, this is what you're going to do, this is when you're going to do it. And it takes it's good, but micromanaging isn't.
Right.
Having direction is good, but micromanaging, if you're not coaching around the why, is a limiting factor, and is it inviting. And I think a culture that we want to create is very inviting, and everybody's words are different, but how do you invite people in to be part of it and live to their best self or their highest potential, is really what it's about. What are some factors that you help people move through the fear into the possibilities?
What are the factors that I do? The question came out of nowhere. We're hitting each other from out of nowhere. I think one of the first questions is, how am I wrong about what I'm looking at, and how can I open myself to be vulnerable about what I'm experiencing? And there's in the world of work and business these days, people are really pushing psychological safety, and I think that's something that Doug and I have also spoken about, and I think that psychological safety is something that you have to really worry about when you haven't actually invited people onto your team that are vulnerable. Um, and so we need to create this idea of a foundation, or an installation of psychological safety for those people who are not vulnerable, because they're ready to protect themselves at any moment. And so when you have that, they're in fear that they're going to get hurt. They're in fear that they can't speak up. They're in fear that they're not going to be paid attention to in a certain way. And really, what's going on with that particular person is they're not paying attention to the fact that they're putting that pressure on them that they can't do it, and then they're projecting it. And if you have a bunch of people doing that, then we got to put in a policy of psychological safety that, hey, we're not going to point out where people are doing something wrong because we don't want them to feel unsafe. Well, yeah, but if they're doing it wrong, then it needs to be pointed out. So it's kind of against growth.
It goes back to when you were speaking of the lawsuit because one of the inmates committed suicide. Oh, now we need to look at it. And so when I hear the psychological safety, it's like, oh, someone had one experience with one other individual, and now we need to institute this, rather
Right.
than having the one discussion to investigate what happened, and then the victim per se, and then who the offender was, and
Right.
having that discussion, bringing them together, seeing that there was a point of view. But that takes a leader and a manager to have that discussion. And isn't it just easier to put in a system
Policy.
and a training and a policy, and just very reactive? And I think there's so much of that reactivity versus intentional. So let's talk about the intentionality of that cultural drift again.
Well, I really think that before we get there, one of the other problems I want to point out is that when we do start seeing those problems, we do the psychological safety or put some kind of policy in place. The other thing that we do is we try to do this kumbaya thing of trying to create, let's do employee engagement fun stuff, and we incentives, or let's do these fun team building things that, well, they create an artificial harmony, but they don't actually create culture. And so it's almost like a mask or a band-aid over the top of some kind of seething problem. And so as a result, now we have, policies that aren't working. And then we have artificial harmony that's not working. And we might even, throw in moving people and getting them on different teams. So we separate. You see where I'm going here? We separate the people who have problems with each other, and we just keep Joey over here and Bobby over there, and then we won't have a problem. So now we have artificial everything. And how are you going to actually be able to come together and focus on what we're really there for, which is to make the business profitable, make the business successful, and make the business scalable, if you're constantly focusing on putting in policies and creating fun times and making sure that these people don't talk to each other? And I say two people, but it gets to be a number of people.
It can. I mean, I remember that in managing early on was, okay, well, we just won't schedule those two people together. What a nightmare that becomes, especially as you're growing, or someone goes on vacation. It's so much, like, you might say, okay, that's a fix, but that's an avoidance. And it creates a lot more work rather than addressing and having that little bit of conflict.
It makes me think of the big family occasions, like a wedding or something, and then you're trying to put people at the right table so they don't get arguments. But and as the leadership is really overthinking and doing all of this stuff, the employees start to distrust, and they start to step away from or lose interest in the company or the vision, the mission. They lose. I didn't sign up for this. I want to be able to come in and do my job and do it well and be a high performer. And so now I think, I don't trust that the leadership's going to take care of things the way they need to. And then the leadership hears something like that and they go, oh, we better put another policy in. and it's just continuous cycle of separation and siloing and making sure that we can solve all of this instead of going, wait a minute, let's get everybody together and talk about this as a group. And let's get together and really understand what we really want as we're going forward with our vision for what we're doing and how we're going to behave. And people don't do that. They just keep trying to solve little pieces at a time instead of going, wait, let's get back to basics. Who
Yeah,
are we and how do we act?
slow down to go fast. Are we in alignment with what we discussed 3 months ago, 2 years ago, or have we just drifted away from it? And how can we go back to the one team? Alan Mulally of Ford. What's that one thing that we're coming together cross-functionally, teams, maybe even stakeholders or the boards involved in that? And what does it look like? And it's better sooner than later. We see it when companies acquire other companies. How do the two groups of mission vision kind of culturally combine? Or when you add another division in your business or another product, how does that team come in with the main vision of what you are doing? Because your purpose vision doesn't change. The way you're executing, like within the division or department, Terry likes to say, because division creates division. Department, how does that department, they might have a little bit different mission, like the marketing may have a little bit different mission than the sales department per se, or the creation division might be a little bit different in what they do day to day, but their overall vision is the same. And so how are you having that conversation to be working on one project that uplifts everyone? And it comes back to the culture piece, is the conversations around those clarity questions, discipline 2, as we speak of, how's that cascaded through the company and then through all the human systems? And that's where Terry and I really find the fulfillment, is how do you be able to work through the conflict, to have that cohesive team. Discipline 1. Discipline 2 is creating that clarity and that project, which is the 6 questions. And it's all in a book behind me, The Advantage by Lencioni. And then, how are you communicating that? And it might be, how many times do you say, Terry? The chief reminding officer?
Oh, well, probably one more than you thought. Every
One
time.
more than you thought. And
Every
people
time.
receive information differently at different times based on where they are in their own emotional state, in their development, in their career. It all depends. So the more we're saying it just a little bit differently back into those core cultural pieces, the light bulb's just going to go for them someday.
Absolutely. And I think just on the idea of reminding is we have to remind over and over and over again, not because people are dumb or stupid or can't remember, but their priorities of their own life and their priorities of the day and their priorities of the position, all of these different priorities are fighting for primary focus. And we're all having trouble with focus these days with the phones and the things ringing and then the spam calls and whatever's going on. We're all pulled off of focus all of the time. So instead of taking it personally that somebody doesn't remember that they're supposed to do something, if we just move into, I'm a reminding officer, whether I'm the chief or I'm a secondary, we're reminding people of which direction that they're attempting to go and asking them if they need help. And when we're doing that, people are much better able to stay on track. And
I,
I think
I
of,
I love that, Terry. And I think it's not, you said you don't have to be the chief one. It can go the other way. Like as a employee or an hourly worker, there's no reason why I can't say, hey, we talked about doing this. I know you've been very busy, but having this review is very important to me because I want to know how I can better serve. And having those kind of relationships where you've opened your, like we opened with, was that vulnerability. And it's saying, hey, you know what? I did make a mistake. Let's, or I did forget about it. You're right. I do have a lot on my plate. Aligning with them and saying, okay, let's get that scheduled, and then following through with it. It goes miles for your culture of being able to have that interaction of managing up as well as down, as well as with your peers. If you have all that in your business is golden. It's growing, it's got its culture, it's expanding, it's ready for what's next. And you have those willing, able people that are being attracted to do more with you.
And I think that's really key when if you are having any kind of cultural drift or know that you're off base on where you're trying to go, you got to start looking inside yourself. For one, is like, how am I actually contributing to the drift? And then two, who wants us to get back to where we're supposed to be, and stop creating policy and start creating conversation connection.
Mm.
We gotta actually create clarity. And there's, Lencioni, we talk a lot about Lencioni because a lot of his stuff is really good for culture. And we use some of the frameworks to explain quickly what takes a while to put in place. And the idea of the temptations of a CEO is one of his books, Five Temptations of a CEO, but it's five temptations of a human being. We all have the temptation to avoid conflict. We all have the temptation to protect ourselves. We all have the temptation to get rigid and just make policy rather than try to understand each other. We all tend to focus on how we can be well liked instead of create some kind of accountability system. I would rather have people like me than keep them accountable. And we all tend to also look at our status instead of, are we actually getting what we were looking for in the interaction? As long as I feel important, it doesn't matter if I hit my goal. That's a problem. And so we have these 5 issues that come up that start to destroy culture. Now, at the center of every one of those issues is ego. Eliminating
Ego.
great
Oh,
opportunity.
ego.
Oh, ego. And we eliminate our great opportunities to have a great business, to have a great team, to have a great result, because we're so focused on trying to make it okay for us. And we can't separate from the ego. I was saying this to somebody last night, is we need our ego. It's our space suit. We need it for the journey, but we don't have to live protected all of the time. We can be vulnerable and unzip the thing and let ourselves out a little bit. But it takes a little bit of courage to do that. And it takes a lot of being honest about what you're really looking for, where you really want to go, and where you're at that isn't where you want to go. And when people start doing that, they start to actually be able to create the business, they create the life, they create the direction that they want to go, and they can generate that. But if they're not looking at it and they're just putting policies in, or they're just firing people when they don't work out, or they're separating people, or they're whatever they're doing,
Spinning out emotionally, not sleeping, and then creating a policy that might solve it if you follow up.
well, hopefully it will, if people will
Oh
follow
yeah,
the
hope is
policy.
great.
We'll put this policy in, and then they're going to follow that because they're not following anything else. Well, wait a minute. I've got a bunch of people who I'm attempting to lead, but they're not following. There must be a problem with how I'm leading. And what we want to do as leaders is start going, okay, am I trying to make people follow me, or am I attracting people to my way of thinking? And when we can do that, it's a very different landscape. And so, how do we solve it?
How do we solve cultural drift?
Yes.
By paying attention to it and saying that it's okay. Hey, we drifted, be vulnerable. We're not where we want to be with this. And we see that it's impacting ourselves and our entire team, upside and downside. It might even be blending back into your home life. And it's probably showing up in your cash flow as well. And it's okay if you've never addressed it before either. There's
Yeah.
always a time to jump back in so you know you're hiring the right people, you have a low turnover, and things are just growing and expanding for you.
Yeah. And so it really takes getting back to what we would, of course, call foundations or basics of your why you exist as a business and how everybody's going to behave. And if you can't really understand how to go about doing that, it makes sense because not everybody knows. A lot of people know how to actually create a business and create a system for revenue, but they don't know how to get people to get along. And they don't know how to get people
One of
to
my
go along with them. Go ahead.
one of my favorite memes that we used once was the man trying to dig himself out of his hole.
Yeah, yeah, it's awesome. Uh, pretty soon you can hit yourself with the pickaxe in your head. Uh, yeah, and so this is really an interesting topic because people don't really talk about it that much. But your culture is your business, and you can't have a business without a reason why you're doing it and without a game plan for how everybody's going to interact together. And so if you find your business is off where you want it to be, or you find that you want to actually tighten that stuff up, the Organizational Health Collective has a bunch of members that could work with you. I know Christine and I, we work with that particularly well. We really like to work with that. And my partner on this podcast or live stream, whatever we're calling it, who's usually here, Doug Cothe, he is amazing with working these out too. And so reach out to the Organizational Health Collective, reach out to Generator Coaching Consulting, that's us, or the People Smart Group, that's Doug, if you find that your culture has drifted and you want to make a change. So we're going to call it there, and we will talk to you next week. See you, everybody.